My name is Josiah, and the year is 1865. I'm an old man now, but what I'm about to tell you happened long before these hairs turned white. I was born a slave on a cotton plantation in South Carolina. From the day I was born, my hands were destined to work the land. I never knew freedom, and each day was a fight for survival. I lived to serve, and I lived without hope. I'm sharing my story because I want future generations to understand what life was like for a slave. I want them to know about the suffering, the tears, and the blood that stained this land. I hope that by hearing my voice, you can feel a fraction of the pain I carried my entire life. My story is a cry to ensure that no one ever forgets the horrors we slaves endured. I lived in a world where my humanity was denied from birth. I grew up seeing my family and friends treated as property, bought and sold like soulless objects. Each day was a struggle to survive, and each night was a battle to find the strength to continue. My body bears scars that will never fade. My mind is marked by memories that will never disappear. I want you to understand that slavery wasn't just a period of forced labor. It was a cruel system that destroyed lives and families. I saw mothers separated from their children, husbands separated from their wives, and friends torn apart, never to see each other again. The chains that bound our bodies were only part of the terror. The invisible chains that bound our souls were even more painful. Telling my story is my way of honoring those who never had the chance to speak. Many of my friends and family died without ever seeing freedom. Their voices were silenced forever, but through mine, I hope their stories can be heard. They deserve to be remembered, not as slaves, but as human beings who fought and suffered in search of something many take for granted, freedom. I want this story to serve as a reminder for future generations. Never forget what happened and work to ensure it never happens again. Slavery left a deep scar on our society, a scar that can only begin to heal when we fully acknowledge the suffering it caused. Let my story be a beacon of hope and a warning to never repeat the same mistakes. But my story isn't just about pain and suffering. There's something you need to know. Something that changed everything in my life. During all those years of servitude, I discovered a secret network of abolitionists helping slaves escape to the north. This group, known as the Underground Railroad, offered a glimmer of hope amidst the surrounding darkness. The idea that there could be a path to freedom sparked a flame of hope in my heart. It was on a cold winter night that I first heard about this network. A runaway slave had found temporary refuge on our plantation and shared stories of how abolitionists helped slaves find their way to free states. That night changed everything for me. For the first time, I began to believe that there was a chance, however small, to escape the chains of slavery. But this hope also brought with it even greater danger. We planned our escape carefully. We knew any mistake could mean death. Secret meetings, whispered exchanges of information, and cautious glances became part of our routine. However, something I could never have imagined happened. An unexpected event put all our plans at risk. One of the abolitionist leaders we trusted betrayed us. This betrayal wasn't discovered immediately, but its consequences were devastating. The traitor had reported us to the authorities, and our attempt to escape was brutally halted. That night, we were captured and taken back to the plantation. The physical pain from the punishment we received was terrible, but the emotional pain of betrayal was even worse. We were so close to freedom, and everything was taken from us in an instant. The betrayal shattered our trust and left us unsure of who to believe. We were thrown back into the darkness of slavery, with hope destroyed and our spirits broken. The possibility of reaching the much-desired freedom seemed more distant than ever. This unexpected event not only put our plans at risk but also made us question whether we would ever manage to escape. The feeling of always being on the brink of freedom but never actually reaching it was a constant torture. This uncertainty and fear of never truly being free haunted us daily. My parents were slaves before me. My father worked in the cotton fields, my mother in the big house. They were strong people, but always tired, always sad. Life on the plantation was harsh and unforgiving, and hope was a word that rarely found a place in our hearts. My parents never had the chance to know freedom, and their dreams were buried along with their lost youth. As a child, I played with other slave children. Our games were simple, an attempt to find a bit of joy amidst the suffering. We ran through the fields, hid among the crops, and made up stories of distant places where freedom wasn't just a dream. But our games were often interrupted by the sound of the whip or the cries of the older ones. These sounds constantly reminded us of the cruel reality we lived in. At 8 years old, I started working in the fields. My small, delicate hands weren't prepared for the hard work. The cotton plants hurt my skin, and the long hours under the scorching sun left my body exhausted. I cried in pain many nights, wishing for a different life, but knowing this was the only life I knew. The work was relentless, and each day felt like an eternity. My father tried to teach me to be strong, but I saw the pain in his eyes. He told me to be careful, to avoid the overseer's wrath, but we both knew violence was inevitable. My mother, on the other hand, tried to comfort me, but her words were only a small, temporary relief. Pain and fear were part of our daily lives, and all we could do was endure. These early years of my life shaped who I would become. I learned to be resilient, to find small joys in the smallest things. Every smile, every moment of play with other children, every sunset after a long day of work was a small triumph against depression. But at the same time, these happy moments were overshadowed by the constant reminder of our condition as slaves. The childhood I had was stolen by the cruelty of slavery, and the dreams of a better life were always stifled by the harsh reality that surrounded us. Life as a slave was full of barriers. The work was grueling. The conditions were inhumane. From dawn until dusk, we worked without stopping. The scorching sun burned our skin, and extreme exhaustion was a constant. Our bodies were pushed to the limit, and often beyond. There was no rest, no relief, just an endless cycle of exhausting work and suffering. I saw friends punished severely for mistakes often beyond our control. One day, a close friend was caught trying to rest for a few extra minutes. The overseers found him and, without hesitation, whipped him until he lost consciousness. That horrific scene stayed with me. It wasn't just the physical pain we endured, but the constant humiliation and dehumanization. I saw death up close many times, and each time one of us fell, it felt like a piece of our soul was being torn away. The cruelty of the slave owners was unimaginable. They saw us as property, not human beings. No matter how much we suffered or how desperately we fought for a moment of rest, to them we were just tools to generate profit. Any sign of weakness or insubordination was met with brutal punishment. Pain and fear were our constant companions, and hope was a luxury few of us could afford. Each day was a new challenge, and each night was a relief to have survived another day. But that relief was always brief because we knew the next day would bring more of the same hardships. Nights were filled with nightmares of the horrors we faced during the day. The fear of being punished, of losing a loved one, or of not surviving to see the dawn was overwhelming. These traumas marked my soul, and to this day, I feel the weight of those memories. There's no forgetting or completely overcoming what we lived through. The traumas I witnessed and experienced profoundly impacted my adult life. Even after the abolition of slavery, the physical and emotional scars remained. The constant vigilance and distrust we developed to survive still haunt me. Sleepless nights, flashbacks, and the feeling of always being on the brink of danger are daily reminders of a past I can never leave behind. Slavery stole more than just our freedom. It robbed us of our peace of mind and left scars that will last for generations. But the biggest problem I faced was when I discovered that Mary, my wife, I called her my wife, but we never really got married. It's just a way of speaking. She was pregnant. The news should have been a reason for joy, but instead, it brought a crushing weight on my shoulders. I knew our child would be born into slavery, that he would face the same pains and sufferings as all of us. The thought of seeing my own child grow up as a slave was unbearable. Every time I saw Mary caressing her belly, I felt a mix of hope and despair. Hope because that little being could be a light in our dark life, but despair because I knew the world he would be born into would offer nothing but pain and oppression. Slavery not only stole our present but also our future. I had to do something, anything, to change that fate. But what could an enslaved man do against such a powerful and cruel system? Mary tried to be strong, but I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew, as well as I did, that our child was destined for a life of servitude. Each night, as we held each other in our small cabin, we promised one another that we would find a way to save our child. But the whispered promises in the dark couldn't ward off the brutal reality that surrounded us. The fear for our child's future was a weight we carried together, but sometimes it felt unbearable. I constantly thought of ways to escape. I heard stories of other slaves who had managed to flee, of abolitionists who helped guide fugitives north. But every plan seemed filled with impossible risks. The slave owners and their overseers were always vigilant, and the punishment for those who tried to escape was severe. Yet the thought of doing nothing and passively accepting the cruel fate that awaited us was something I simply couldn't bear. Each passing day brought a new wave of anxiety and fear. Time was running out, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. But slavery had taught us not to trust, not to hope for miracles. We were trapped in a cycle of despair and helplessness. And despite all my efforts and desires to protect my family, the brutal reality of slavery continued to crush us, day after day, stealing any glimpse of hope. When I found out Mary was pregnant, I remembered the abolitionist group and turned to them to help save me, my wife, and our future child. This group was our last hope, a ray of light in the darkness that surrounded us. I put all my faith in this plan, believing that we could finally escape slavery and offer a better life for our child. We planned everything in secret, meeting furtively on quiet nights, discussing escape routes and safe contacts. Each day, hope grew in our hearts. The idea of freedom was so close we could almost touch it. We knew it would be risky, but we were willing to risk everything. However, something we could never have predicted happened. The abolitionist leader we trusted betrayed us. That night, we were captured while attempting to escape. The physical pain of the chains and whips was terrible, but the pain of betrayal was even worse. Much later, I discovered the reason for the betrayal. The abolitionist leader secretly loved Mary and in an act of jealousy and possessiveness, preferred to see us whipped and Mary losing our child rather than helping us escape. He not only destroyed our dreams of freedom, but also caused an irreparable loss in our lives. Mary, due to the stress and injuries, lost our child. The pain of that loss consumed us, and the hope we had built was shattered in an instant. It was a devastating betrayal that destroyed our last hope of freedom. The trust we placed in the abolitionists was crushed, and the certainty that we could escape became a distant memory. The feeling of being so close to freedom, only to have it brutally taken away, was unbearable. The betrayal wasn't just a failure in the plan. It was a breach of trust that left us helpless and desperate. After that night, our lives were never the same. The pain of losing our child and the betrayal of the abolitionist leader left us emotionally devastated. We continued to work in the fields, but our spirits were broken. Slavery had robbed us not only of our freedom, but also of our ability to dream of a better future. Each day was a struggle to find the strength to go on, knowing that our last hope had been destroyed by someone we trusted. Now, I want you to imagine what my life would have been like if I had been free. I wanted to walk the streets freely, without having to look over my shoulder, afraid of being captured or punished. I dream of the possibility of walking into a bakery, choosing a fresh loaf of bread, and having a coffee, savoring something so simple yet so out of reach. I wished I could read a book by candlelight without the constant fear of being caught and punished for trying to educate myself. One of my greatest wishes was to marry Mary. Not just call her my wife, but really have the chance to marry, to celebrate our love in a safe and free environment. I wanted to build a house, our house, where we could raise our children together, without the fear of them being torn from our arms and sold like property. I wanted to see my children grow up, playing outside without the fear of the whip or the chains. I wished I could rest in a comfortable bed after a day of honest work, to feel the comfort of a soft mattress, a warm blanket, and sleep knowing that the next day would bring new opportunities and not the same repeated horrors. Simple things like choosing what to eat, where to go, and how to spend my time were impossible for a slave. Every small choice you have the privilege to make is something we, slaves, will give our lives for. I imagine teaching my children to read and write, sharing with them the knowledge I fought so hard to gain. I see myself sitting in a comfortable chair, with my children around me, reading stories and teaching them about the world beyond the plantations. I dream of walking hand in hand with Mary, without fear, without chains, just the joy of being together, free. Every minute of freedom you have is something we, slaves, will give our lives for. Value your freedom, because it is the most precious gift anyone can have. Never underestimate the importance of being free, of having the power to make choices, of living a life of dignity and respect. My story is a reminder that freedom is an invaluable treasure, something that must be protected and cherished at all times. This is my story, the story of Josiah, the last slave of South Carolina.